Hey, I'm Kyle Thompson, Frankfort City Commissioner. I wanted to make this video based upon a number of things that have happened over the last couple of weeks. Some misconceptions, some half-truths, and some downright lies that have been said about not only myself, but also Senator Williams. But in reality, what's more important is Senate Bill 220 and what Senate Bill 220 does and what it doesn't do. I think it's pretty important throughout this process that everyone is truly educated on what is a tax, what is not a tax, when is an entity like the plant board required to pay a tax, and whether they have to pay taxes right now and whether they have paid those taxes. First and foremost, Senate Bill 220 does not have any tax creating language in it. None. In fact, nothing in the bill will change what the actual requirements of the plant board are right now with regard to any payments to anyone. The only difference is the plant board has not been making those payments for 78 years. We'll talk about that here in a second as well. In addition to that, what Senate Bill 220 actually did, after I went out on my own time and my own dime to be able to speak to Senator Williams, who is, yes, in the same party that I am, but I was very much opposed to Senate Bill 220. But knowing how the system works, I knew that the likelihood of killing a bill was very difficult. Changing a bill is something completely different. And I wanted to be able to provide for a couple of safeguards. One, I wanted to provide that we save jobs. Two, I wanted to make sure that after we save those jobs, that we lower rates that you pay for your electric and your water as much as possible if we could, and to keep those rates low. And third, I wanted to make sure that the schools and the taxing districts were receiving the money that they're actually already supposed to be getting. And I'll explain that here in a second. But what has immediately came out after I worked with Senator Williams, and I genuinely felt like I had done a service to my community. The next morning I wake up, I have 75 or so text messages and emails from people who are irate, upset, because the plant board has gone out and they have immediately released a press release that the State Journal picked up immediately. By the way, I actually had a meeting with the State Journal. They interviewed me for 1 hour. Never made it into the State Journal from my side of what is going on here. It's fine. I recorded it. I will release it later on this week. Besides that, but let me just explain. Back in October, I was contacted by leadership of the plant board, the highest levels of leadership in the plant board. They told me that they were aware that Senator Williams was about to introduce a bill that would fundamentally change the way they were able to do business. Honestly, not knowing a ton about utility services, I had to dig in and learn a lot. And I have learned a lot, not just with this, but with the NREL discussions that we have had. However, when somebody calls you at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, you tend to pick it up, especially if it happens to be someone very high up in your local utility. I was happy to talk to them. After I hung up that phone call, I got a second phone call from another individual who I am friends with, who also is very high up in the plant board, asking me to also go out of my way and make sure to kill the bill, is what I was told. There was no bill yet, by the way. I didn't even know what the language was going to be. I didn't even know what to kill. In December of this year, I was the individual with the Frankfort City Commission who actually proposed a resolution. The only one who proposed a resolution and actually drafted the resolution and then made the motion to accept the resolution to give what we called unwavering support to the Frankfort Plant Board. I still have unwavering support for the Frankfort Plant Board, and quite honestly, I'm not quite sure why I became the target of so much hate and animosity. I do appreciate the fact when people speak out when they believe something is wrong. I think it's sad when entities and people turn to half truths and outright lies in situations to try to do the worst in politics, which is to be self-serving, and that's what apparently has happened. So when the bill came out, I actually went and talked to Senator Williams immediately after the original language came out. He and I had a very cordial discussion. It was never in private. There was always someone in the room with us. that can verify everything that I'm about to tell you. In fact, a week before we had our first meeting, we were both at the Franklin County Republican meeting, and folks there can tell you that we had a cordial but tense discussion between the two of us about what was good and what was not good about some of the proposals. The interesting thing is that there were a lot of misconceptions about why Senator Williams was doing this, and I'm going to get to why it appears he was doing this and why the plant board is apparently not wanting this bill to go through. From October until January, we were told, and in fact all the way up until the point that the language was finally dropped in a bill, that plant board was not for sale. And if you'll remember all of those TV ads and the ads in the State Journal and all of the postings, and every time you turned on a Flyer football game or you watched around 10, they talked about the plant board is not for sale. Well, the plant board is not for sale, and I made sure of that. I went in, I had that discussion with Senator Williams the second time we met in public for dinner, and I reached across the table and said, this has to be stricken, this has to be stricken. You have to take out any language that puts any realization into play that the plant board or any of its divisions are for sale. I believe that the Frankfort Plant Board offers tremendous services. Some of my best friends actually work there. I consider them family. And when I was having these discussions with Senator Williams, I thought of those individuals. I have nothing to gain or lose from this other than I have friends who work there that depend upon this as their job, and also people in our community love and respect the plant board for what they provide to us, not just every day, but when things are very bad, and we do appreciate those folks. When I went and talked to him, we struck all of that language. The second thing that we did was to make sure that we could lower those rates as much as possible if we could. And the third thing was to make sure that if there were taxes that were supposed to be paid, that they were being paid. What I found out was there aren't taxes that are supposed to be paid. There are payments that are supposed to be made. And I'll explain what the difference is in those two and why it makes a difference. Nothing in Senate Bill 220 creates a new tax. There's no language that creates a new tax. There's specifically nothing in the bill that is different than is already in the statute that controls the Frankfort Plant Board. I know that sounds weird, but it's true. And I'll show you that here in a second. But let's talk about the history of the Frankfort Plant Board just very quickly. In 1943, the Frankfort Plant Board was created when the city of Frankfort decided that they wanted to acquire the entities that were providing the electric and water services to the city of Frankfort. In fact, they actually talked about the electric, light, and power systems. That was when it was created. It was in 1943. Shortly thereafter, in 1946, an ordinance was passed. It was passed by the Common Council, that's what the city commission used to be called, on August 12th, 26th, and 27th, because it was signed in different parts of 1946. There's the document that essentially allowed for the plant board to fall under, at that time, what was called Chapter 212. That's now Chapter 91, but that was 80 years ago. Things have changed with regard to numbering, but nothing has changed with regard to the language. So when that occurred, the city of Frankfort allowed the Frankfort Electric and Water Plant Board to be created as its own entity, okay? Now, they also call themselves a body politic and a corporation, okay? They consider themselves a subdivision of the city. Now, interestingly enough, and this is very crucial. In the original purchase and creation of the Frankfort Plant Board, there was specific language in that document that said that every single dollar that was taken in had to be put into a different fund. So it came in from electric, had to go into an electric fund. Came in from water, had to go into a water fund. The other thing that it did, that it talked about, that you had to create your own bond fund, your own depreciation fund, and your own operating fund. Those were already in there. It also created a voucher system for those who had trouble paying. So just so you know. And the last thing and most important thing that it did was under subsection 6 of the 1943 Act, okay? The 1943 Act talks about, right there, you can see it highlighted. I'm going to read it for you. It says, the board shall pay to the city an amount equivalent to an annual ad valorem tax on the fair cash value of the waterworks and electric, light, and power system determinable upon the tax rate prevailing in such year. 81 years, guys. Okay, the next question is, what happens when they switch under Chapter 212, which is now Chapter 91? Well, the interesting thing about that is when they did so, we have to look at two ordinances that went into effect, one in 2004 and one in 2006. And it actually talked about any ordinance levying a tax shall remain in place. And in 2006, when they rewrote the ordinances, again, they must have been really bored. They rewrote them in 2 years. That when the governing body of any municipality now or hereafter owning an electric and water system, operating them as one combined system, that's what we have, or a plant board, may elect to operate under the provisions of KRS 96.172 to 96.188. From the time of the exercise of such election and the appointment of a board under such sections, the electric and water system of such municipality shall be operated under those provisions. Now, here's where things get kind of weird, because under Chapter 96, 182, right here, it says that the acquisition or construction of any public project, as above defined, which essentially is also says defined by 58010, which is for any project for the public good, shall be first approved by, guess who? The city commission, not the board, okay? This is 96, 182, that they fall under. They chose to fall under this language right there, okay? It's important that you know that they actually have to fall under that language. KRS 96, it specifically states that in lieu of a payment for ad valorem taxes, remember, the city had invoked an ad valorem tax in 1943, and in 1946, they chose to go under 96. 96 says, if you don't want to pay the ad valorem tax, you have to pay what's called a payment in lieu, which is different because it is actually in place of paying your taxes, okay? But in 1999, they created something called the Frankfurt Plant Board Municipal Projects Corporation. And the purpose of this was to create an organization that would handle all of the issues related to the telecom business and the exploration of growing out the telecom business in Frankfurt and Franklin County. Now, the reason that that's important is because the Frankfurt Electric and Water Plant Board, the combined board, is the only entity that was ever created in 1943 and then falls under the 1946 language that's now in Chapter 96. There's nothing with regard to telecom that controls those, which is very odd because we're told that there would be new taxes on that area. Well, that's not necessarily true because the school taxes under Kentucky, under 160, specifically states that schools can impose a tax on your telecom business alone, okay? Now, that's not what has happened in the city of Frankfurt, okay? It's never happened, and they can actually add it onto it up to 3% of what the total revenues are for the telecom business. Now, that would not be something that would be very exciting for the plant board, but that would be your taxing district, that being the schools, either Frankfurt Independent Schools or Franklin County Public Schools, that would invoke that additional tax, and that is solely upon those entities that provide, wait for it, cable television aspects to the local districts. So the only tax that they can add on top of that would have been the this 3%. And they can even say, according to the Public Service Commission, that 3% is added solely because of the school districts adding the tax. Seems fair. They added a tax on you. But they haven't done that. I don't know if they will. It's an election year. I doubt they'll probably add that on there anyway. But the reality is, though, that under the City of Frankfurt's own code right here, when it comes to the operation of the Electric and Water Plant Board and taxation, it specifically says that they're subject to all provisions as they may be from time to time amended by the acts after 1946, and that the mayor is hereby authorized to appoint the individuals and that they can issue bonds. That's it. It does not exempt them from the taxes. In fact, the original 1943 taxes, the taxes found in KRS 96.179, which is that payment in lieu of taxes that I was telling you about, that is still in place. No new taxes. None. There are no new taxes, right? And so then you have to look at, well, wait a second, what does the city of Frankfort say about taxes? Well, our own taxing ordinance, Chapter 35, Taxation, states that pursuant to the authority granted in KRS 132-285, the city hereby adopts the county assessment for all real and personal property situated within the city as appropriate and on the basis of all ad valorem tax levies ordered or approved by the Board of Commissioners. Pretty simple, right? There has never been a new tax that has been added on to the plant board. In fact, when I went back and looked at several filings in the Public Service Commission filed by members of the individuals who are still a part of the organization, they actually point out that some years they paid the ad valorem taxes to the schools, some years they didn't. Just decided to, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes it was $6,000, sometimes it was zero, sometimes it was $65,000, sometimes it was zero, a lot of times it was zero. And so whatever their arrangement was with their own accounting purposes, it doesn't make a lot of sense. The interesting thing about that is that was actually in 2008 in a case involving a proposed adjustment with regard to the wholesale water distribution and water services rates in Kentucky. And in their own brief, in their own filings, they say that they pay the ad valorem tax. Now, they have not paid the ad valorem tax, at least in the last 10 years, for any dollars. Yet, interestingly enough, the plant board itself, for the next 5 years, even though they have bought their power through KYMEA and we've told them we have the lowest rates, they have a built-in their budget increase every single year. 2.5% increase on your utility rates, boys and girls. So anytime they tell you that it's going to be Kyle or Jay Williams that are raising their rates, wrong. Absolutely wrong. This year alone, the plant board, $8.5 million in net change of their financial position. That's net revenues. That's after they've paid everything. $8.5 million. Now you may say, why are my rates the way that they are? Well, that's because they have grandiose ideas of building other items that you may use in the future. At least that's what I thought. Then we started looking at their books. It's interesting because the electric portion of the company, if you'll look at the audit for last year, actually lost money in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet that same division lent money to the telecom division of the company. That was very interesting when I found that out. In fact, when I started looking into this a little more, it really became kind of interesting because one of the things that even one of my opponents has said is that we control the plant board and that if there's a problem with the plant board, we can control it locally. There is nothing further from the truth. We do not control the plant board. In fact, the city of Frankfort doesn't even control the plant board. We should be brought everything that is considered a public project. We're not even brought those. In fact, we haven't been brought those since 1999. And even still, the plant board has been before the Public Service Commission multiple times on cease and desist where they have not followed even SEC regulations. And that's one of the things that I want to get to here in a second. But the most important thing is I want you to look at, this is the PVA assessment for the property that the Frankfort Plant Board sits on out in off Sauer Boulevard over on Flynn Drive. And you will see here that the improvement value has not gone up in 4 years, but it is $16 million on top of a $500,000 land value. Now, interestingly enough, the city of Frankfort actually gave the plant board $1, or gave the property to them for $1. And when the new plant board building was built, it has an assessed value. Well, the reason it has an assessed value is because they fall under the ad valorem taxes of the state of Kentucky. Always have. Always have. So here's the real crux of the situation. They came and attacked me and said that Kyle Thompson and Jay Williams created a new tax on the people of Frankfort. That wasn't it at all. There's already a tax owed. There's taxes owed that they haven't paid for 78 years to the local school districts. Now, some years they paid a few $1,000s or $0. It was almost always $0. But when it comes to the ad valorem taxes, they own $30.5 million in assessed property values. If you use the city and tax rates where those are, it would be between $800,000 and $1 million. Okay? One of the individuals that works at the plant board who would have done the assessment, interestingly enough, called me the day after the article dropped that said, Kyle Thompson is going to cost you $3 million in new taxes. And he called me and he said, hey, what's the local property tax rate? I mean, if you're gonna come at me, if you're literally gonna, come that hard at me and say that I raise taxes, someone who is not a tax rate, I'm the only person who's voted against every tax increase ever in this city. And yet they said that I raise taxes. And they didn't say up to $3 million. They didn't say maybe $3 million. They said it is a devastating, grim was the word they used, tax of $3 million. And then they called me and asked me what the tax rate was. How's that work? How's it work? Because I showed my math. And I kept saying, show me your math. But they couldn't have done their math. And they had to have made the number out of thin air because they didn't even know what the tax rates were. They don't even know what taxes they would have to pay. That's the hilarity in all of this. But what's even worse is, by them pointing out this ad valorem language that's in there, they have just shown a huge spotlight on the fact that under the very statute that they're under right now, they should have already been paying the ad valorem tax. I don't know what 12% interest is, which is usually the going rate in courts, compounded for 78 years on the ad valorem taxes on everything the plant board owns. But I'll guarantee you one thing, they're not going to go after you for that. They're not going to go after the plant board. The plant board isn't going to be able to say all these things that your taxes are being raised. No, they already had an ad valorem rate that they should have been paying, and they haven't been. And they've been banking all those dollars and all that revenue. So once again, let me show you the math. $8.5 million right here, right? Let's give them their due. They chose a number out of thin air. Let's give it to them. First of all, they're going to pay their bond payment, which is $440,000. Boom, right there. Then they're going to pay their made up $3 million ad valorem tax, whatever that is. Boom, right here. Guess what that leaves? That leaves $5 million in net revenues. The only language in this particular bill that they're probably upset with is that money goes back to you. It's not a tax increase. It's a rate decrease specifically because they have taken more money from you than what they needed to run their operations. And that's what they're upset about. If they were a public entity and subject to open records request, I would say that we would probably know all of the incomes, where everything is spent specifically on a line item basis, and we don't, and we won't. So you have to ask yourself, why in the world, starting in October of last year, would they have started this attack? Why on the day that the language of the bill dropped, and I actually thought we did something good for the citizens because we did. The language in 220 is solid and it's good for you. Why did they hire a PR firm paying them who knows how much money? A PR firm that is skilled in crisis management, and they pivot immediately from, we need to save the jobs, which we did, everyone will stay employed, no issues there, to, well, now you're going to raise taxes on us. We're not doing anything. You should have been following the law. It's not the first time that this has happened to the plant board either. The plant board in 2009 actually signed one of their bids saying that they had released all of the information related to the bond funding and their revenues. That was a lie because they didn't actually file they didn't disclose any of that information in 2009 or 2010 or 2011, 2012, or 2013. Not until 2014, they self-reported to the SEC, we didn't do something right. So now that same group is telling you, the individuals in Frankfurt, that my evil plan this whole time was to trick you into raising your taxes that I would see $0 of, and that would not go to anything related to city matters. It all goes to the schools. Every bit of it. And that's the thing that's so frustrating to me. Because then they say in their word salad of some of their press releases that we already donate tons of stuff to the school. Like, we give free internet to the school. Well, that's the thing, is that they may provide the internet, but then they get repaid by the Kentucky Department of Education. Then, not only do they do that, but then they say, well, we also offer all of these games to be shown on TV as well. That's great. They purchased the rights to show the games on KHSAA. Franklin County, the Franklin County football team, the Franklin County basketball team, they don't get a direct application of those funds like they do when you and I show up, like we're going to tonight at Rupp Arena, to cheer on the Lady Flyers. When you don't come to a ball game and you sit at home because their production is so good, I'm telling you, David and those guys, I mean, they are pros, and it's so good. But 40% of you stayed home this year, and we had a team that went to the Final Four in football. Doesn't happen a lot. I mean, we're getting a little used to it, which we shouldn't. But they're not making any money off that. The other thing that they'll tell you is that, well, we provide scholarships. So in 2023, last year, their audit shows they did give scholarships, and I will admit that they gave scholarships to seniors going to college, $6,000. They had $118 million that they're expected to make this year, but they gave $6,000 to the schools in scholarships. So you're right. I'll give you that one. You give scholarships. But look, I like the plant board. I love my plant board. I grew up with the plant board. I mean, I remember watching those VHS, type of, games where we were watching the local T-ball games and everything, right? I mean, those were the best, We've all watched every Miss FCHS for the last 50 years on there. I actually used to like to watch when they would do the aerobics in the morning, because even though I was eating a donut, it made me feel better about myself. Either way, they've had great programming. And they're still going to have great programming. But for some reason, the plant board doesn't want you to understand that there is no new taxes that are being levied. Perhaps they don't want you to know that they've always had a tax on them and they've never paid it. They probably also don't want you to know, even though they will always say, we're open and transparent, you can look at everything we want. 99% of you have not and will not go look at their audit and their budget, and you'd probably need an accounting degree to understand most of it. Either way, I can tell you at the bottom line, when it says $8.5 million in net revenue change, I can understand that pretty well. So here's the deal. Maybe Senate Bill 220 does or does not go through. But I will tell you this. I have never lied to you. I am the one guy who doesn't care about taking on folks who may or may not want something done right or wrong, because that's just the way we've always done it. I'm not that guy, all right? I'm also not the guy to come at with, well, stay in your lane. You don't know what you're talking about. I got that a lot from some plant board people. I really liked some of the emails that came through that said I was an embarrassment and I brought shame upon my community every time I talked. That was interesting. My daughters remind me of that every time that I talk. But the reality is, though, that I'm the guy who is not like every other politician. They're going to paint me as that. And they're going to tell you, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's raising your taxes. He's tax and spend, all these other things. I don't have anything to spend it on because I vote against every other big project because we don't have the money in the city of Frankfort. And I definitely don't want to raise your taxes or your rates. In fact, this rate decrease on average will be between $28 and $40 a month for each one of you. And what could you do with an extra $500 in a year? Doesn't sound like a tax increase to me at all, does it? So what's really at play here? I'll tell you, it's a little secret in town. Those who have been in power don't want other people to now be in power. I don't have an ego for any of this. I can tell you the $18,000 or so that I get from the city commission and the penance that may go on top of that with regard to if I win an election in the future is not worth the 2 weeks that I have stayed up studying these aspects. But what is worth it to me is that my community can be better. We can be better than this. We are on the brink of financial collapse in this community. We do not have any economic development in this community. You will hear others say that we're the ranked fourth micropolitan city in the state for development. First of all, you would not be able to think that. The second thing is most of those jobs and investments, at least half of them came from Anderson County, not Frankfort. Lawrenceburg is in the same micropolitan area as Frankfort. And for all those millions of dollars that were spent, 61 jobs last year. We're not the fourth micropolitan. You guys know that. But you will have people who are in power who will lie to you. They will say to you, our city doesn't have a drug problem. Our city doesn't have a crime problem. Our city doesn't have a poverty problem. There's no homeless people in Frankfort. And they're all lying to you. We have a lot of work to do. And we can do it. But we can't do it the way that we've always done it. And the way that we've always done it is if somebody comes in with new ideas and new ways of doing things to help individuals in this community better themselves, you kill it. And it's ironic to me that other politicians lecture me about taxes. We have the highest tax rates of any contiguous county in central Kentucky. The highest, 38.5%. It's ridiculous. And on this issue, I will tell you, my entire goal was, number one, they told us to save the jobs. I saved the jobs. The second thing, they're raising our taxes. I'm not raising anything. You've always had an obligation, Plant Board. And the only people who have suffered are the children in our schools. 18% of our kids live below the poverty line. Shame on you, Plant Board, for making this political when it's about the children. And for those folks who work at the Plant Board, who I honor and respect for all of their hard work, you are being played. You are being played as pawns right now. Because the people higher up in your organization are lying to you. And they're lying to the general public. There is no new tax. There is no means that was going to sell off the Plant Board. There is none of that. None of it. And they'll tell you that we're ratepayer owned. That we're controlled by you, the ratepayer. And that is an outright lie. You have not had control over this organization since 1946. And since then, you've had no control whether they actually pay their fair share. A company that makes $118 million and turns around and has $8.5 million in net revenue, and they can't give some of that based upon what the law says they have to the schools. That's where this ends. Ask yourself, what's really in play here? I've shown my math. Plant board, show yours. I will debate anybody on this topic. I have read and studied and done my research. But do not lie about me. Do not lie about legislation that I helped draft to save jobs. And do not lie when it comes to what your obligations are, plant board. Right now is not the time to be using a tough line of, it would cost us a lot of money to give to the schools. Frankfort Independent Schools, one of the most need-based schools in the state, doing awesome on their test scores, doing awesome on their academic achievements. It's not because of anything you've done, plant board. That's all in the backs of the teachers and the administrators over there. So I'll ask again, what's wrong with Senate Bill 220? I'm waiting.
Okay, let's go.